Hey guys, this is Zeke. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be doing the very first video of reading my stories. It's called The Adventures of Bob the Cat. I might change the title, but I just want everybody to know some of the characters in the story are real, some are not. Some of the scenes in here are real, but most of them are not, and some are just based off my favorite TV show. So let's get right into it. This is book 1. And then chapter 1 is one day after me and my partner Mariah's police shift was over for the day, we decided to hang out with my friend Cohen. We decided that we were going to hang out at my house and play Minecraft. After half an hour, Cohen decided to get some water for me and Mariah. Meanwhile, me and Mariah were sitting around talking about what we have in common when we hear a meowing noise. It sounded like a cat in need. So Mariah and I go outside and walk over to the nearest tree and see a cat tangled in a ball of yarn stuck in the tree. Mariah asks, "What should we do?" "Let's go find a ladder so we can get him down," I say. So we find a ladder leaning up against my shed. We then bring the ladder over to the tree and decide that Mariah will climb up first to get the cat and I will follow. While we are climbing, a squirrel comes out of nowhere and almost makes us lose our balance on the ladder. Then, after we get the cat down, I ask Mariah, what should we name him? She replies, "Let's name him Bob." I then say, okay. So we sit down and watch him play. Then Cohen comes out with the waters and asks, "Where did the cat come from?" We tell him we found him tangled in a ball of yarn stuck in a tree. And of course, as usual, he doesn't believe us. He says, "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard." Mariah says it's true, we even named him Bob. He then says, "I think we should go around town to see if we can find any lost cat posters." Mariah and I didn't want to go because we wanted to keep him, but we reluctantly agreed. Next, the three of us take my police car and drive it into town. When we get there, we decide that we will split up to try to find any posters. I tell Cohen, me and Mariah will search one half of town and you can search the other half. He then says okay. While Cohen is searching one half, Mariah and I are secretly hoping we don't find any posters. Meanwhile, Cohen is checking every shop and telephone pole. Eventually, he finds a bulletin board in an Aroma Joe's that says "Lost Cat." Meanwhile, Mariah and I are walking around checking telephone poles and shops when we come across a Starbucks. We then find an old teacher named Mr. Gorman wearing his short shorts and eating salt and vinegar chips and drinking his protein shakes. We stop and say hi. He says hi and asks us, "What are you guys doing here in town?" I tell him it's a long story. Not really. Then both of us say goodbye and head off looking for more posters. Meanwhile, Cohen runs into my other two friends, Jake and Andrew. We ask him what he's doing in town. He says that's a long story. He then says goodbye and continues on. When we're all done, we drive back to my house and compare Bob to the cat on the poster. Bob is an orange cat with all white paws, but the one on the poster was all orange, but it had 3 white paws. Then it was time for Cohen to head back to his house. So we say goodbye. After he leaves, Mariah and I play with Bob for a while. And then we go shopping to get some stuff for Bob. After we get back from shopping, Mariah goes and hangs out with Bob while I look up important stuff on my computer. Just then we hear a knock on the door. We go over and open it and see another one of our old teachers named Angie. We then ask her, what are you doing here? She says, I was just walking around town when I saw you guys. Also, who is the cat? We tell her that it's a somewhat long story, and she says okay, and see you later. We then say goodbye. Chapter 2, Road Trip Part 1. After we say goodbye, my phone rings. I pick it up and answer it. Mariah then asks, who is it, Zeke? I tell her it's my cousin Natalie, but I call her Nat. I tell her she's just calling to check in on me. Mariah then says okay. I ask Nat, do you know anything about lost animals? Actually, I own a company that finds out if an animal is lost or not. Why are you asking? She asks. It's a long story, but we found a cat stuck in a tree. And we went around town to find any posters. We found one, but it wasn't the same cat. So I was just wondering if you could come and help us out. I tell her. Sure, she says. Great, we'll see you then, I say. I then hang up the phone, but then get a call on my radio saying a prisoner has escaped and is heading to Washington. I tell them me and Mariah will follow the prisoner, catch him, and bring him back to prison. I then tell Mariah, hey, we're going to Washington to visit my cousin Natalie, and we're going to catch a prisoner. So Mariah and I get into my car with Bob, and we head down the road. We first drive to South Dakota. We head to the local Walmart. We buy some cat food, cat toys, and cat litter, and clothes and steak. We then head to a hotel, where we spend the night. The next morning, we decide to go visit Mount Rushmore. While we're walking around, we see David, and a friend of mine, taking pictures. He sees us and says hi and asks, what are you guys doing here? Mariah then tells him the story about Bob, when I suddenly spot the prisoner and start to run after him. Mariah notices and starts to follow. She says goodbye to David, who now looks very confused at what just happened. Meanwhile, we keep chasing the prisoner, but he hops into a car and drives away. After that, we drive to Boise, Idaho, where we find a hotel and spend the night with Bob. Next morning, we go to the store and buy a few things. After, we drive to Oregon. We then drive up to my Uncle Tim and Aunt Christie's driveway and knock on the door. My uncle opens it and says, Zeke, what a surprise, and who's this with you? I tell him, Uncle Tim, this is my police partner and my very, very best friend, Mariah. Mariah, this is my Uncle Tim and Aunt Christie. It is very nice to meet you. He's told me so much about you, she says. I then ask Uncle Tim if it's alright if we could stay for a couple nights. He says that it's alright with him. So the two of us find 2 separate rooms, unpack our bags, and settle down. Just then Mariah reminds me that we still have Bob in the car. So I go ask Uncle Tim if it's alright if we can have the cat in the house. He says that it's okay. So I tell Mariah that she can bring him in. Then we go to bed. The next morning, we decide that Bob will stay with Tim for the day, and while we go shopping. When we get there, we see an old teacher, Angie, buying oranges. She sees us and says hi, and then asks, what are you guys doing in Oregon? Mariah tells her we're chasing an escaped prisoner and going to visit Zeke's cousin Natalie. Just then my phone rings. It's our police chief, Hank Voigt. He wants to know if we've got the prisoner yet. I tell him that we haven't. Then we head back to Tim's house and Mariah plays Minecraft while I look up important things on my computer. Then we go to bed. Chapter 3, Road Trip Part 2. The next morning, both of us pack up our stuff and Bob's stuff. We then say thank you and goodbye. We also tell them that we'll see them later. We then drive toward Washington. We then find a hotel and stay the night. In the morning we drive to Seattle, Washington. We stop at Space Needle. I don't know how, but we find another friend of mine, Star, walking around. We go over and say hi. She sees us and says hi and asks, "What are you guys doing here?" While Mariah tells her the story, she says, "We found a cat tangled in a ball of yarn stuck in a tree." Then me, Zeke, and his best friend Cullen went around town to find any lost cat posters. We found one, but it didn't match Bob. Then Zeke gets a call from his cousin Natalie telling us to visit her. Sky then says goodbye and good luck. After we drive to go visit Mount Rainier. Once we get there, I tell Mariah this is an actual place I have been to before with my cousins, Natalie and Tyler. Tyler sadly died 3 years ago. That's why Natalie calls to check in with me, because I'm somewhat her only family member left, apart from Aunt Christy and Uncle Tim and a few others down the road. I then asked Mariah, we used to climb a mountain, camp up there, and hike back down. Do you want to do that tonight? Sure, she says. So I hike up a mountain, camp, stay for the night. Then we hike back down the next morning. We then arrive at Nat's house. Chapter 4, Visiting Cousin Natalie. When we arrive at Natalie's house, both of us go up and knock on the door. Then Natalie opens the door and says, "It's good to see you both. Please come in." So we come in with Bob and sit in the living room. And we explain everything. Then Natalie asks us, can I take Bob to my company so I can find out if he's lost or not? And we say okay. She then says if you want to, you guys should unpack and get comfortable if you guys are planning on staying for a while. I'll be back in a bit with Bob, she says. So we go find 2 rooms with a bed on the left and one on the right. So I take the left room and Mariah takes the right one. We then unpack our stuff and Bob's stuff. While she unpacks, I get out my computer and try to locate the prisoner, deciding that we'll go shopping. I call Nat to tell her that we might not be here when she comes back, and she says okay. So we drive around the city, and we stop at the store to buy some water, cat stuff, and corn. After, we go to Pet Collar Customizer store to get a collar for Bob. Then we get back in the car and head back to Natalie's house. Chapter 5, Catching a Prisoner. When we get back, we see Nat out front with Bob. We ask her, do you know if he's lost or not? We're really worried about what she's going to say, because if he's lost, then we'll have to give him back. She then says, I have good news, he's not lost, he's just astray. I then ask, so we can keep him? Yes, you can keep him, she says. Just then me and Mariah get a notice on our radios that says a prisoner has been spotted in our area. So we say goodbye to Natalie, get in my car, and drive around until Mariah spots a prisoner running through a field. So we drive through the field, but he steals a van and drives off, but we follow him for a while until we finally corner him in a dead-end alley in another town. And surprisingly, Bob jumps out of the car and chases the prisoner, and then he scratches him to the ground. We look at each other, utterly confused at what just happened. I then arrest the prisoner and put him back in the back of the car. While I'm doing this, Mariah calls Sergeant Voight and tells him the whole story. After that, we drive back to Natalie's house. I tell her that we have to head back, but thanks for helping us with Bob. She says, no problem, hope to see you both soon. I then tell her, don't worry, we'll see you soon. We get our stuff and say goodbye, and we head down the road back towards Chicago. I'm sorry guys, my voice is just a little scratchy. I'm just gonna try to get this over with. On the way down the road, chapter 6, the end, question mark. On our way down the road, I tell Mariah that there's a couple places we need to stop by. First stop we make is to Uncle Tim and Aunt Chrissy's house. When we arrive, we knock on the door and Uncle Tim opens it. He says, how did your journey go? We then say, it went well. We caught a prisoner and found out that Bob is not lost. That's great news, he says. He then offers us to stay the night. We accept, and we stay until next morning. Next morning we say thank you and goodbye. Then drive to South Dakota and find David at Mount Rushmore. He sees us and says hi. We tell him everything that we told Uncle Tim, and he also says that's great news. We then say goodbye and drive back into Chicago and head straight to the station. When we get there, 2 officers come and get the prisoner, while Mariah and I go to Voight's office. He then tells us to come in. We then tell him about how Bob scratched the prisoner to the ground. I tell Voight that Bob should train as a police cat. He says he'll think about it. After 2 weeks, he decides to have Bob train as a police cat. He passes every test and gets the job. Chapter 7, the next road trip. After 2 weeks of taking a vacation, the 3 of us go back on the job, and we get assigned a task that says we have to go hunt down a serial killer. So the 3 of us get in my car, drive to my house, and get packed up and stay for the night. Next morning, we get in the car and head down the road. Our first stop is South Dakota. Then Mariah asks me, hey Zeke, what is the serial killer's name? I tell her. His name is Gregory William Yates. Why are you asking? I'm just wondering, she replies. When we get there, we head to Mount Rushmore. We walk around a bit until Mariah sees the killer in front of us. So we draw our weapons and tell him to turn around. He turns around, but it's a false alarm. We apologize and keep searching, but we don't find him. Chapter 8, the hostage. After that, we head to the Grand Canyon. When we get there, we stop and look around, but no luck. So we find a hotel to spend the night. Next morning, I call Natalie, and she asks me if there's anything new since me and her last talked. I then say, yes, there are some new things. Bob the cat, he became a police cat, and me and Mariah are still partners, and now we're hunting a serial killer named Greg Yates. That's a lot, she says. And also Mariah and I work together in the intelligence unit. What's that? She asks. I tell her, it's a police unit that solves homicides and murder cases. But then I tell her that I have to go. I hope we can see you soon. I hang up and ask Mariah a somewhat odd question. Do you think we should have had a dog instead of a cat? No, I think it's great that we have a cat, she says. The next morning we drive to Oregon. After arriving in Oregon, we hear that Yates was spotted in Washington, so we head to Washington. While we're there, we spend a couple nights at Natalie's house. So I call her and tell her that we'll be staying for a while. When we get there, we unpack and go to the store. When we get there, we see David buying Rubik's Cubes. Just then, we see Yates behind him. Chapter 9, The Shoot. Just then, Yates sees us and grabs David and takes him hostage. Next, Yates starts shooting everywhere. Mariah tells Bob to sneak up from behind and scratch Greg while we're still pointing our weapons at him. He then attacks and scratches Yates badly. He lets go of David, hops into a car and drives away. We then help David up off the ground. Then the three of us go back to Natalie's house. When we get there, we settle down and see if there's anything else we can do about the killer. Then my cousin comes over to speak with me in private. After she asks to speak with me in private, she says, why do you have to do this job? I'm always worried you're going to get killed. And why do you have a cat as a police animal? I then tell her, first, this is my dream job. Second, I'm not going to die on the job because I have a partner named Mariah who will always have my back. And third, because Mariah and I chose to have a cat as a police animal. Just then Mariah comes over and tells me that Yates was spotted in Boise, Idaho. So we drive to Idaho and arrive at a hotel surrounded by police cars. We see Sergeant Voight and ask him what's going on. He says that Yates is holding a couple of people hostage. We then tell him that three of us will go in and try and negotiate with him. So we locate the hotel room, so we go in, drop our weapons, and negotiate with him. After an hour of negotiating, we try to take him down, but then he draws his weapon and shoots Bob. In an instant, I rush over to Bob while Mariah shoots Yates in the chest, and he falls to the ground. While Mariah rescues the hostages, I rush Bob out of the room, quickly explain what happened to Voight, and me and Mariah then rush Bob to a hospital. When we get there, the doctors take Bob from me and take him into the ER. While we wait, Mariah makes a few calls. After 4 hours, I decide to go wander. When I come back, I see a bunch of people, including Jake, Cohen, David, Uncle Tim, Aunt Christy, Voight, and Stat, and a few others in the waiting room with Mariah. I then pull her aside and ask, why are they all here? They're all here because of Bob, she says. Just then the doctor comes out and says that sadly Bob didn't make it. So everybody comes over to comfort me, including my partner Mariah. When we get back to my house, Mariah decides that we should watch NASCAR to help take our minds off of the death of Bob. After the race, she calls Roy and asks him if two of us can take some time off to grieve for Bob. He says, sure, take as much time as you need. And she says, okay. Chapter 10, Bob. After we take 3 weeks off to grieve, we head back to the department to start our shift. After our shift, we head back to my house and settle down. After a couple of hours of being at home, the doorbell rings. Mariah goes to answer the door, but there's nothing there but a box on the porch step. She then says to me, hey Zeke, come look at this. So I come over and we bring the box over to the couch. We open it and find that there's a cat in it. We look at each other confused, so she takes the cat out of the box. It looks just like the first Bob. So I call Natalie and tell her what just happened. She says, sure, I'll come down. I'll see you in a few days. Okay, see you soon, I say. I then hang up and tell Mariah that Natalie is coming over to look at the cat. While we wait for Natalie, we decide to name him Bob Jr. in case we can keep him. We then call Voight and tell him what just happened and asks if Bob Jr. can train to be a police cat, and he says, sure. Just then, Natalie comes over a few days later and says to us that he isn't lost, so we can keep him. So we train him as a police cat. Thank you guys for watching this long video. I'm sorry it was long. I'm sorry my voice was dying by then, but please like, subscribe. I will be doing much more stories. Subscribe to both my channels, my diecast channel and this story channel. Peace.